What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video on the channel. Today, I'm going to be giving you guys the best UFC 312 card that I can give you. We're going to be going over a few prelims and as well as 5 main card fights. So I believe there's 3 prelims and then 5 main card fights that we're going to be going over. I tried to make this as realistic as possible while also making it as good as possible. So there are talks about Dan Hooker versus McGregor, but I'm trying to be realistic. I don't know if we're going to see McGregor again, but who knows? I made this as realistic as possible while also having an Australian-ish fighter, Australian/New Zealand fighter on every single fight. As we know, the UFC likes to do that. So I guess besides the main event, as we can see right here, which is a little interesting, but I do think the main event timeline is going to be Dricus du Plessis versus Sean Strickland, number 2. So not to spoil anything, but that will be the main event of this card. But let's start off with some of the prelims. Starting off here, first, I have Steve Erceg versus Tim Elliott. Tim Elliott is ranked in the top 10. He had to pull out of a fight. I believe he was supposed to fight Tatsuro Taira. I'm getting my names all mixed up right now. I believe that he was supposed to fight him, and then he had to pull out. I forget exactly what his injury was, but I believe it was like something in his nose or something like that. But he had to pull out. So now I have him coming back here against Steve Erceg. Steve Erceg is on a 2-fight losing streak after losing that championship fight and then losing to Kai Kara France. So this one maybe could get him back in a contendership at least a little bit. I wanted to give him someone below in the rankings, especially after 2 straight losses, but someone that will still be challenging enough, so not like a tin can. You don't want to have him go out there and fight someone that's not ranked, or unless it's a really good prospect that's not ranked, but I think this would be a good matchup for him. Next up, we have Tai Tuivasa, who is going to be coming back, and for this fight, I wanted to go out there and I wanted to give him someone that isn't ranked. Even though Tai Tuivasa is somehow still ranked at this point, I honestly thought he would have been cut from the UFC at this point. And with one more loss, it might be getting close. But I'm giving him Martin Buday here, who is on a pretty good streak right now. He did lose, but besides that, since coming off of the Contender Series, he is 6-1 in the UFC since then, with only 1 loss. So I think it would be good for both of these guys. For Tuivasa, he should win this fight, even though Buday is coming in here. And he hasn't fought since June, so I think this will be big for him. But also, if Buday comes out here and wins at 32 years old, he could get a very, very big win. Do I think the UFC would do this? I don't know. Maybe you guys don't like this fight, but I think for Tai, this is a chance for him to show that he could still win. And, I mean, we last saw Buday fight against Arlovsky, so he went out there, and he's still working his way up. This would be a very big fight for him. And if he wins, he could vault into a ranking. And if Tuivasa loses, then I don't know. Maybe he's done in the UFC, unfortunately. But next up, in the final prelim, yes, this is a prelim fight. That's how stacked this main card is that I made. You guys could argue after about the overall rankings of where you want to see these fights to as well. Besides the championship fights, I think you could put each fight themselves in different spots, but let me know what you guys would do after. But this is the first prelim that I have here. I have Kai Kara France versus Tatsuro Taira, a 4 versus 5 matchup. And Tatsuro Taira, coming off of that loss, I think you still give him a good fight here. The winner of this could easily become the next #1 contender, because hypothetically at this point, we're going to have Pantoja versus Kai Asakura. Whoever wins that will fight Brandon Royval. And then I think whoever wins this fight can fight the winner of Royval versus the winner of Pantoja and Kai Asakura. So a lot of moving parts, but this could be an easy #1 contender fight for both of these guys, both in the top 5. Kai's fighting down a little bit, but I mean, realistically, what other fights are you going to give him at this point? I think this would be a very, very entertaining fight. And it is high stakes. The winner gets a chance at a championship fight. And I think Kai is still one fight away at this point because Royval is getting the next title shot. So I don't know if he wants to sit around and wait for another, maybe wait for another championship fight. And I think both of these guys could easily get into the championship contention if they win this fight. Like I said, a top 5 fight in the flyweight division. It is a flyweight fight, so I know some people aren't as interested, even though I think this would be a banger fight. That's why I put this in the prelims. You guys can argue after once I go through all of these, but that's the prelim fight. Let's start off with the first fight on the main card, which is JDM versus Kamaru Usman. That's what I'm telling you guys. Number 2 versus number 4 in the first fight on the main card. This card, if they do this, it is going to be a massive card. And I think by the end of this, you guys could probably agree that this is a good card. So let me know. These guys have been talking about fighting. I think it's eventually going to happen, and I think this would be the perfect spot for it to happen. JDM, I'm a big, big fan, and I do think this guy can be a future champion. I think he has everything in his bag to become a champion, and he's going up against Kamaru Usman here. I think whoever wins this potentially could be the number 1 contender, because Shavkat versus Bilal. Whoever wins this fight fights the winner of Shavkat and Bilal. That's easy. Leon Edwards, I have no idea what he's going to do. He's probably going to be hiding for a little while. But these guys, it seems like they verbally agreed to fight at 312, so that's why I'm putting it right here. And I think this would be an absolute banger of a fight to start off the card. And I think 3 rounds would make it even more interesting as well, because you could have this as maybe a co-main event, easily could be a main event for a fight night, but I think Kamaru Usman, I think on this card, 3 rounds would make this so much more interesting, because maybe we'll see these guys really go at it because there's not as much time to go out there and get the win. Next up, this is what I'm telling you guys. This card is absolutely insane. We have Charles Oliveira versus Dan Hooker, another top 5 matchup here. I think this would be the best matchup for Hooker. He said that he's going to fight someone within the top 5 next. Islam versus Arman is next. I think we all know that. I believe that's probably going to happen in January. So I'll make a video talking about maybe a potential card that we could put for that for UFC 311, I believe that would be. But if we're looking at the guys above him, Dustin Poirier, I still think Poirier versus Volk would be a good fight for both of them next. Justin Gaethje could be another option here for Dan Hooker, but I think Charles versus Dan Hooker would just be absolutely insane. And the same thing for this as well. This could easily be a co-main event or a main event on a fight night, but putting this at 3 rounds, both of these guys are going to go out and try to get the finish, and it pushes them even more. Next up, in our final fight before our championship fights, we have Israel Adesanya versus Kai Borralho, and I think this has been talked about to be on UFC 312 as well. That's why I put it on here. And the winner of this, the thing is, I don't know exactly if the winner of this gets a championship fight next, because there's a lot of moving parts as well in this. You have this fight, and then you also have Khamzat Chimaev versus Robert Whittaker, which is going to be happening this weekend as of this recording, and the next pay-per-view. So we'll know soon whoever wins that fight. If Whittaker wins, I believe he would get the next title shot, but let's say Borralho comes out and wins this. There's going to be a lot of guys up at the top, and then maybe you do the winner of this versus the winner of Khamzat versus Whittaker, and you could easily do the loser of this goes against the loser of Khamzat and Whittaker as well. So I do think this is almost confirmed for 312. I do think this fight will happen, which will be very exciting to see, because we're seeing an up-and-coming guy in Borralho who could easily be in a championship fight within the next year. If he wins this, by the end of 2025, he could be fighting for the championship if he goes out and wins this fight. Going up against Israel Adesanya, who just lost to DDP but still looks solid. So how is Izzy going to go out here? It's not a championship fight, and now we're seeing contender Izzy again. So will he be able to go out there and win this fight and then potentially get a rematch against DDP or that rematch against Sean Strickland? Now, for the co-main event of the evening, we have Ilya Topuria versus Alexander Volkanovski. This is assuming Ilya beats Max Holloway. You could throw Max Holloway in here as well. I think Alex gets the rematch. It does make it very interesting as well. Let's say let's say that Ilya loses and Max wins. We see Max versus Volk 4. Either way, Volk's getting a rematch for the championship. I think he's going in here, and whoever wins that fight, he's getting a championship fight. But I do have to stick with my gut and my predictions. I think Ilya is going to win, so I think this is going to be the fight that is coming up next. Like I said before, I do think that Volk should fight against Poirier next, but realistically, he said that he's going to be waiting for a championship fight, so I think this is what's going to happen. I think that Poirier-Volk fight would be very fun to see, but I said that earlier, just not to spoil the co-main event, but also I do think that should happen, but I do also think this will happen. What I think should happen, what I think will happen are very different. Volk does deserve to get a championship fight after his championship reign for the amount of time that he held the belt. I do think it's going to still go the same way it went the first fight, and if he fights Max, that makes it a lot more interesting because you're going into a fight against Max Holloway where you know how to beat this guy. You've beat him 3 times, and I think that changes a lot. But assuming that Ilya beats Max, I think this is the fight. I don't think they're worried about making a rematch between these two. When you have Max versus Volk 4, that does complicate things a little bit more. Do you want to see that fight again? I don't know. Me personally, not really, but if they are going to do it, then they'll do it. Now, in the main event of the evening, like I said before, Dricus du Plessis versus Sean Strickland. Like I said, now that we've seen the order, you guys can go through and kind of move around these fights. I do think this is the main event over Ilya versus Volk, in my opinion. I do think they could easily move Volk and Ilya to be a main event for a pay-per-view, but it seems like Volk has come out and said that he's fighting for the championship at 312, so I don't know if that's just him saying it or not, but I think if the UFC gave him their word that he's fighting for the championship next and he's fighting at UFC 312 next, then I can put the pieces together there as well. And I think this one will happen at 312. I think this fight is big enough to main event almost any card that it would be on. I don't think there's very many guys that this would be under for a co-main event. I realistically can't see too many fights where this would be under. Maybe like, I don't even know if there would be one up to this point, maybe Pereira, but I don't think they would do that. I think this rivalry and Dricus du Plessis deserves way more credit as a champion. As you guys know, big Dricus fan, and I know people are going to be going into this fight just like last time, where there were a lot. I don't want to ever really call out casual UFC fans because there's no problem being a casual UFC fan, but the amount of people that I saw during this fight and then after saying, "Oh, it was such a robbery." You can't have a close fight and a robbery. That's not the same thing. If it's a close fight, you go out there, it's a close fight, maybe they get the decision wrong in your opinion, but that's not a robbery. A robbery is when it's not close and they give it to the wrong person. The robbery and a close fight do not equal. They cannot intersect. They're parallel lines. They do not work together at the same time. And that's what happened last time. So we'll see exactly what happens this time. I don't think it's going to happen again. I think Dricus could go out there and maybe finish Sean Strickland in this fight. And I think that people are starting to not turn on Sean Strickland again. I'll talk about this fight more once we get into the actual booking of it. And once it's actually booked, I'll talk about it a little bit more. But I do think that Dricus du Plessis is the most overhated fighter in the UFC right now. This guy is so entertaining on the mic and in the octagon. So I don't agree with all that hate for him. But yeah, this is the card with the main event, the co-main event, the main card fight number 3, main card fight number 2, main card fight number 1, prelim fight, and prelim fight. So you guys could argue about where you would put these rankings of these 4 fights, all top 5 contender fights. Do I think they're going to put all of these on here? I don't know. I feel like maybe they would save this one, Kai Kara France versus Tatsuro Taira. I could see them doing all 3 of these, though. I do think if I had to bet, I think the Izzy one definitely will happen, and I think JDM versus Usman definitely. Both of those will definitely be on this card, and I do think this will be the main event. Do I think Volk versus Ilya? I think Ilya, if he wins, might take a little bit more time off than fighting at 312 because you're making the champion after a title defense go and fight the number one contender in the number one contender's hometown, home city, home country, whatever you want to call it. I don't know exactly where in Australia he's from, but this is the only fight out of these ones that may not exactly happen. But this, if you guys are watching this and you guys are in the UFC and you're watching this, Dana White's watching this, if you make this card, this could easily be the best card of the year just to start off the year in February. So let me know down below what you guys would change, maybe other fights you guys would want to see on here, and I'll see you guys in the next one.